Get that mop and that costume patch out of my operating corridor. The words cracked across the polished marble lobby of St. Bartholomew Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, loud enough for donors, cameras, and hospital board members to hear. Earl Maddox, 68 years old, stood with one hand wrapped around the handle of a yellow mop bucket. His gray janitor uniform was damp at the cuff. On the left sleeve, stitched above a faded seam, was an old Army medic patch he had never removed, even when the hospital laundry supervisor told him it made the uniform look uneven. Dr. Victor Raines pointed at it like it was dirt. "This is a governor's event," Raines said, smiling just enough for the cameras, "not a veterans parade. Security, move him." A few people laughed because they thought they were supposed to. Earl did not answer. He only lowered his eyes to the red spill spreading near the entrance of the auditorium, where a waiter had dropped a tray of cranberry drinks minutes earlier. He had been cleaning it before someone in a tailored suit decided he was ruining the photographs. Behind Raines, Governor Daniel Whitaker was shaking hands beneath a banner for the hospital's new trauma wing. His wife stood nearby. A state health official waited with a folder. Reporters leaned in for clean angles. Then the governor's right hand opened strangely. His smile stayed on his face for half a second too long. Then his knees buckled. At first, everyone thought he had tripped. A camera tilted. A woman gasped. The governor folded against the podium, knocking the microphone sideways with a hard metallic pop. Dr. Raines froze. Not for long. Just long enough. Then he barked, "Clear the area. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon. Give me room." People backed away in a widening circle. Phones rose. A security officer pressed his earpiece and shouted for medical staff. The governor's wife dropped beside her husband, her voice breaking on his name. Earl's hand tightened around the mop handle. From where he stood, he could see what Raines could not. The governor was not clutching his chest. His breathing was ragged, wet, and wrong. His lips were losing color. His left shoulder twitched once, then stopped. Raines knelt beside him and reached for the governor's wrist. "Probably vasovagal," he announced, loud enough to calm the crowd and protect himself. "Someone get a wheelchair." Earl moved before he realized he had decided. "Doctor," he said, voice low, "you need to check his airway." Raines did not even glance back. "I told you to leave. His breathing is obstructed." The surgeon's smile vanished. He rose halfway, enough to tower over Earl from the center of the circle. "This man is the governor of Tennessee. You are a custodian. Do you understand the difference?" The lobby changed after that, not loud, worse, quiet in a way that made every witness responsible. Earl's jaw worked once. A memory passed through his face so quickly that most people missed it. But Denise Harper, the state health official in the second row, saw his fingers brush the patch on his sleeve as if checking whether it was still there. Raines saw it too. He reached out, pinched the edge of the patch between two fingers, and tugged. The old stitching held. "Army medic," Raines read, mocking the words. "How noble. Did they teach you to mop faster?" A few nervous laughs died before they became sound. Earl's face did not change, but something in his eyes went very still. "Don't touch that," he said. The warning was soft. Raines leaned closer. "Or what?" On the floor, the governor made a choking sound so small it nearly disappeared beneath the hum of lights and camera equipment. Earl heard it. He dropped the mop handle. It struck the marble with a slap that startled half the room. Raines grabbed Earl by the shoulder before he could kneel. "You take one more step toward my patient and I'll have you fired before this building clears." "My patient," Earl repeated. 2 words. Quiet. Almost tired. The governor's wife stared up at them, terrified and confused. "Please," she said, "somebody help him." Raines shouted for a crash cart, but his hand was still on Earl's shoulder, holding back the one man in the lobby whose face had shifted from humiliation to certainty. Earl did not shove him. He did not yell. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his janitor vest and pulled out a folded square of clear plastic. Inside it was the patch's twin. Older, darker, sealed like a relic. Denise Harper stood. "Mr. Maddox," she said, and her voice carried just enough to make Raines blink. "Where did you get that?" Earl kept his eyes on the governor. "From a place where waiting cost lives." Across the lobby, the governor's breathing hitched and stopped. That was when the cameras caught the first real fear on Dr. Victor Raines's face. Not because the governor had collapsed in public, but because the janitor he had just humiliated seemed to know exactly what was happening before anyone else in the room did. And before the night was over, that old Army medic Patch would start an investigation that threatened Raines's license, the hospital's biggest contract, and the polished reputation he had built by stepping over men like Earl Maddox. But to understand why Earl had been standing in that lobby with a mop in his hand, and why he had spent 22 years refusing to remove a patch most people barely noticed, you have to go back 3 weeks earlier. Back before the cameras. Back before the governor hit the floor. Back to the basement hallway where Earl Maddox began every morning before sunrise. Earl Maddox started every shift at 4:40 in the morning, when Nashville still belonged to delivery trucks, night nurses, and people too tired to pretend. St. Bartholomew Medical Center sat on a rise near Midtown, all glass and limestone above ground, all pipes and humming machines below. Earl knew the basement better than most doctors knew their offices. He knew which floor buffer pulled left, which elevator hesitated on level 3, and which break room coffee machine needed a soft hit on the side before it gave you anything but brown water. He kept his locker neat, 2 uniforms, 1 spare pair of socks, a metal lunch pail with a dent near the latch. Taped to the inside of the locker door was a photograph of a woman in a blue church dress standing beside him at Percy Priest Lake. Her name had been Ruth. Earl touched 2 fingers to the photo every morning, not in a dramatic way, more like checking a pulse. Then he pinned the old patch flat on his sleeve. Ruth used to tell him he treated that piece of cloth like it could answer back. Earl would say it was just habit. She never believed him, and she was right not to. The patch had come from a field jacket he brought home from the Army, back when his hands still smelled of antiseptic and diesel, back when he could fall asleep anywhere but never for long. It was faded now, the green thread worn pale around the caduceus. To the hospital, it was decoration. To Earl, it was a record of names no one in Nashville would ever know. He had been a combat medic in places where the air itself felt dangerous. Later, he worked ambulance crews in Kentucky for a few years, then left after one winter pileup on I-65 took more out of him than he could explain. By the time Ruth got sick, steady insurance mattered more than pride, and janitorial work at St. Bartholomew gave him both. The job had kept her treatments covered longer than they could have managed alone. It had not saved her. Now the bills came in envelopes he stacked by date on the kitchen table of his small duplex in Donelson. Medicare statements, pharmacy balances, a final notice from the oxygen company that still made his chest tighten, though Ruth had been gone 9 months. On the good mornings, he paid what he could and packed a ham sandwich. On the bad mornings, he carried the lunch pail anyway. The only person who still came by regular was Miguel Alvarez, a night shift respiratory therapist who had learned early that Earl noticed things other people missed. Miguel was 36, sharp-eyed, and always one missed nap away from exhaustion. He had a daughter with asthma and a laugh loud enough to cut through any hallway. "Mr. Maddox," Miguel said one morning, catching Earl outside the emergency department supply alcove. "You see this?" He held up a cracked suction canister bracket from a portable airway cart. Earl took it in his hand, tested the hinge, and frowned. "This one's been dropped, twice. They keep saying replacement is pending. Pending gets people hurt." Miguel gave him a tired smile. "That sounds like something a supervisor should hear. Supervisor heard it last week." "And?" Earl handed the bracket back. "He said carts don't complain." Miguel's smile faded. That was the thing about Earl. He did not talk much, but when he did, people tended to remember the sentence. He was not supposed to touch clinical equipment anymore. Hospital policy was clear. Custodial staff cleaned floors, rooms, and waste areas. They did not advise nurses. They did not question physicians. They did not question physicians. They did not point out airway risks, even if they had once kept men alive with fewer supplies than a modern crash cart carried on its bottom shelf. So Earl did what he could. He kept hallways dry. He made sure electrical cords were taped where stretchers rolled. If he found a loose wheel on a supply cart, he reported it twice and then placed the cart where it could not hurt anyone until maintenance came. People thought he was slow because he moved carefully. They mistook discipline for age. 3 weeks before the governor's event, Earl found the first sign that trouble was coming in a glossy flyer taped beside the staff elevator. Governor Whitaker to attend St. Bartholomew. Trauma Wing Donor Event. The event. That was what everyone called it after that. The event meant polished floors, hidden clutter, extra security, and administrators walking basement corridors they had ignored for years. For Earl, it meant something else. At the bottom of the flyer, in smaller print, was the name Dr. Victor Raines, surgical director. Earl had known the name before most of Nashville did. Raines had arrived from Atlanta 2 years earlier with magazine profiles, perfect suits, and a habit of calling service workers by their job titles instead of names. He was brilliant in front of donors and cruel in private where it cost him nothing. Earl had watched him reduce a nurse to tears over a misplaced consent form, then walk into a televised interview and speak softly about compassion. The next morning, Earl's supervisor, Paul Griggs, found him buffing the auditorium entrance. "New rule," Paul said, holding a clipboard against his stomach. "No personal items visible during the event." Earl kept the buffer moving in a slow arc. Personal items? Pins, stickers, patches, religious stuff, political stuff, anything that distracts from the brand. The buffer hummed between them. Earl shut it off. Paul's eyes went to his sleeve. "I don't make the rules." "No," Earl said. "You carry them." Paul flushed. "Don't start. Raines wants the front-facing staff clean and uniform. If you're assigned public areas that day, the patch comes off." Earl folded the power cord once, then twice. His hands remained steady, but the air around him changed. "That patch is sewn on. Then wear a different shirt. I only have 2. Then take it up with laundry." Paul lowered his voice. "Listen, Earl. I'm trying to keep you out of trouble. There's a review coming after the event. Budget cuts, outsourcing. They're looking for people who don't cooperate." There it was. The deadline had a date now, and so did the threat. Get through the event quietly, or risk the job that kept Earl's roof in place and Ruth's debts from swallowing what little remained. Earl said nothing for several seconds, then he picked up the buffer cord and wrapped it around the hook. Paul mistook silence for agreement. Good. Just be smart. But Earl was already thinking about the portable airway carts, the broken bracket, the loose discipline of people who cared more about photographs than readiness. That afternoon, after his shift, he took the long way through the emergency corridor. He paused beside the supply alcove and checked the posted inspection tag without touching a thing. 2 weeks overdue. Miguel found him there. "You're going to get yourself written up," Miguel said quietly. "Maybe. You can't fix this place by yourself." Earl's thumb brushed the edge of the patch on his sleeve. "No, but I can remember what matters when other people forget." Miguel studied him for a moment. "The governor's detail is doing a walkthrough Friday. Raines wants everything staged. That's exactly what I'm worried about." Earl gave a small nod, the kind men give when fear has become information. Then he opened his lunch pail and removed a folded maintenance request form he had saved from the trash because the original had never been answered. He smoothed it on the counter. The cracked bracket, the overdue inspection, the missing seal on the backup suction kit. 3 lines, written cleanly in blue ink. 1 copy for maintenance, 1 copy for himself. Earl slid his copy behind Ruth's photograph in his locker before he clocked out. He did not know then that a surgeon would try to strip him of his dignity in front of half the state. He only knew a public event was coming. The hospital was pretending readiness was the same as care. and the old patch on his sleeve had started making powerful people uncomfortable. By the following Monday, St. Bartholomew stopped feeling like a hospital and started feeling like a stage. Florists came through the main entrance with white arrangements that smelled too sweet for a place where families got bad news. A private media crew measured light near the auditorium doors. 2 men in dark suits walked the governor's route with clipboards, pausing at every corner as if danger could be solved by tape marks on the floor. Dr. Victor Raines moved through it all like he owned the building. He was 49, handsome in the expensive way that required maintenance, with silver beginning at the temples and a voice trained to sound calm even when he was cutting someone open. The hospital board loved him because donors loved him. Donors loved him because he made medicine sound like architecture, all vision and excellence and legacy. On camera, he called St. Bartholomew a promise to every family in Tennessee. Off camera, he called the night cleaning crew visual noise. Earl heard that phrase from inside a supply closet while replacing a mop head. Raines stood in the hallway with Paul Griggs and a woman from hospital communications named Marla Voss. Marla had a tablet against her hip, a headset in one ear, and the strained expression of someone paid to agree with powerful people quickly. "I don't want custodial staff crossing the governor's path," Raines said. "No carts, no buckets, no uniforms in the photos." Paul cleared his throat. "There'll be wet areas after catering setup, then clean them before guests arrive. That's not always how spills work." Raines paused. Earl could hear the smile in his voice before he saw it. "Paul, if your people cannot manage floors without becoming part of the event, we can revisit whether your people should be hospital employees at all." Marla tapped something on her tablet. Paul said, "Understood." Earl waited until their footsteps faded before he came out. Paul was still there, staring at the polished floor like it had betrayed him. "You heard?" Paul asked. "Enough. Then help me help you. Stay invisible." Earl placed the used mop head into a plastic bag. Invisible people still see things. Paul rubbed his forehead. "That kind of sentence is exactly why I worry about you." The rule Raines weaponized was simple: chain of command. In a hospital, it sounded reasonable. It kept order. It kept untrained hands away from dangerous decisions. But Raines used it like a locked door. Nurses could not challenge him without risking assignments. Residents learned to apologize before asking questions. Custodians were expected to disappear before anyone remembered they had ears. Earl had spent years respecting command when command meant responsibility. What he saw at St. Bartholomew was different. Here, rank often meant insulation. That afternoon, Miguel found him outside the respiratory storage room, where a printed inventory sheet hung from a clipboard. The portable airway cart still carried the cracked bracket. The suction kit seal still had not been replaced. "I put in another request," Miguel said. Earl read the sheet without touching it. Someone initialed inspection. Marla's team asked facilities to mark all event route equipment as ready. Was it inspected? Miguel's mouth tightened. It was marked. A nurse passing behind them slowed just enough to hear, then kept walking. Earl recognized her. Tessa Green, emergency department charge nurse. She had once thanked him for catching a loose bed break before a patient transfer. Since then, she gave him a nod when others gave him nothing. Tessa came back 30 seconds later and pretended to adjust a linen cart. "Don't say my name," she said under her breath. "But the event route cart is being moved to the lobby for optics. They want emergency equipment visible near the auditorium." Miguel stared at her. "Visible with a broken bracket?" Tessa's jaw set. "I said don't say my name." Earl gave her a small nod. "Thank you." She left quickly. Miguel exhaled hard. "This is insane." "No," Earl said. "It's ordinary. That's what makes it dangerous." The almost exposed clue came that evening, when Denise Harper arrived for a planning walkthrough. Harper was the state health official assigned to the governor's hospital visit. She was in her early 50s, with close-cut hair, sensible shoes, and the kind of attention that made people stand straighter. She did not smile for no reason. Earl liked that. He was wiping the brass elevator trim when Harper paused near his cart. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know if this corridor connects directly to emergency intake?" "Yes, ma'am. Left at the vending machines through the double doors, badge access after 8. "Thank you, mister." She glanced at his name tag. Maddox. Most people stopped at Earl. Harper's eyes dropped briefly to the patch on his sleeve. Something registered, not recognition exactly, more like a question she decided not to ask in a public hallway. "Army medic?" she said. "A long time ago. My brother was treated by a medic outside Mosul." Her voice softened by a fraction. "He came home because of that man." Earl kept his hand on the cleaning cloth. "Glad he made it." Before Harper could say more, Raines appeared from the auditorium entrance, with Marla beside him. "Denise," Raines called, warm and polished. "There you are. Let me show you where the governor will sign the trauma wing pledge." Harper gave Earl one last glance, then followed him. Raines did not miss it. The next morning, Earl's schedule changed. He was removed from the auditorium crew and assigned to basement waste corridors for the day of the event. Paul handed him the revised sheet without meeting his eyes. "Raines?" Earl asked. "Officially, staffing optimization. Unofficially," Paul's shoulders sagged. He said the patch makes donors ask questions. Earl folded the paper once. He could have quit. A younger man might have. A prouder man might have thrown the uniform in Paul's face and walked out into the heat with nothing but principle. But Earl had Ruth's bills on the kitchen table. He had a duplex with rent due on the 1st. He had an oxygen company calling about equipment already returned. He had a body that still worked if he did not ask too much of it, and a job that still provided insurance for the follow-up appointments he kept avoiding. So, he stayed. That was what people like Raines never understood. Sometimes staying was not weakness. Sometimes it was discipline under pressure. At lunch, Miguel sat beside Earl on the loading dock steps. Ambulances came and went beyond the chain-link fence, their lights silent in daylight. "You know he's targeting you," Miguel said. Earl unwrapped his sandwich. "He's targeting anything that reminds people the hospital is not a photograph." Miguel studied the patch. Why not just take it off for one day? Earl did not answer right away. A truck backed toward the dock, beeping in short bursts. Somewhere above them, a helicopter thudded toward the roof pad. "When Ruth was in room 612, Earl said finally, she asked me the same thing. Said I didn't need to carry old wars into new hallways. What did you tell her?" "I told her some things aren't carried because they're heavy. They're carried because they keep you standing straight." Miguel nodded, but his eyes stayed worried. By Friday, the hospital had become spotless in the places cameras would see and careless everywhere else. A curtain hid chipped wall paint near the auditorium. The cracked bracket disappeared from the airway cart, but not because it had been repaired. Earl found it in a trash bin behind respiratory storage. He checked the inspection tag. Fresh initials, same old problem. Earl did not take the tag. He did not make a scene. He pulled the folded maintenance request from behind Ruth's photograph in his locker and added one line beneath the others. Event route cart marked ready without corrected equipment. Then he slid the paper back into place. He could not walk away now, because if something happened during the event, the truth would not be that no one knew. The truth would be that the people with the least power had warned the people with the most, and the warning had been treated like dirt on the floor. The first dismissal came 2 days before the event, in a glass conference room Earl had only entered twice before. Paul Griggs sat at one end of the table with a paper cup of coffee going cold in his hand. Marla Voss stood near the screen, tapping through a checklist titled Event Readiness. Dr. Raines leaned against the window with his arms crossed, as if the room itself had been assembled for his convenience. Earl's maintenance request lay on the table between them. Raines picked it up with 2 fingers. "Mr. Maddox," he said, "do you understand why clinical readiness is not determined by custodial impressions?" Earl kept his hands folded in his lap. "It's determined by equipment that works." Marla's mouth tightened. Paul gave Earl a quick warning glance. Raines read from the form. Missing seal on backup suction kit, cracked bracket, overdue inspection. Strong language for a man who cleans floors. I wrote what I saw. You saw a cart. You did not evaluate a patient. You did not perform a procedure. You saw a cart. Miguel stood near the door, invited because his name appeared on the original request. He had the posture of a man trying not to risk his mortgage. I can confirm the bracket was cracked, Miguel said carefully. I reported it too. Raines smiled at him, and facilities replaced the visible damage component. Visible isn't the same as complete. The smile thinned. Marla cut in. For the purposes of the event, the cart is staged as a precaution. We'll have a medical team on site. With an incomplete backup kit, Earl said. Raines set the paper down. This is exactly the problem. A little knowledge makes certain people imagine themselves essential. The sentence landed hard because it was not only about the cart. Paul cleared his throat. Maybe we just keep Mr. Maddox assigned to basement routes that day and move on. I agree, Marla said. Raines stayed focused on Earl. And the patch? Paul's coffee cup bent slightly in his grip. Earl did not move. Raines nodded toward his sleeve. You were informed about personal items. It's part of the uniform now. No, Raines said. It is part of a story you tell yourself. Miguel's eyes lifted sharply. Earl's voice stayed even. You can assign me where you want. I'll do the work. Then you'll remove it? No. The room held that one word longer than anyone expected. Raines pushed away from the window. Paul, document insubordination. Paul stared at him. Doctor, we can issue a verbal warning first. Document it. Marla lowered her tablet. Victor, HR will want consistency. Then let's be consistent. Raines faced Earl again. No visible personal symbols during the event. If you appear in a public area with that patch, you will be removed from duty. If you interfere with medical staff again, I will recommend termination. Earl stood slowly. He took the maintenance request from the table before anyone could stop him. Then he folded it with the same care he used on clean linen. Raines gave a quiet laugh. Planning to frame it? No, Earl said, planning to remember who saw it. That was the first active step Earl took. Not dramatic, not loud. He simply stopped trusting the hospital to keep the warning where it belonged. By lunch, the warning had spread through the basement. Keep your head down. Don't cross Raines. Don't mention the cart. Don't wear anything extra. Don't make trouble before the review. Earl heard versions of it at the loading dock, the staff elevator, the linen chute. People said it kindly. That made it worse. Late that afternoon, Tessa Green found him outside the decontamination corridor with a sealed trash cart. You need to be careful, she said. I am. No, you're controlled. That's different. Earl almost smiled. Fair enough. Tessa glanced behind her. The governor's wife has a shellfish allergy. It's in the catering notes because of cross-contact risk. That's not your lane, but I heard the kitchen arguing about seafood hors d'oeuvres for donors. Earl's face sharpened. Is the governor allergic? No, she is. But allergies run strange and the event menu is too busy. I asked if emergency meds were checked. Marla said medical optics are handled. Optics again. Tessa lowered her voice. I can't fight Raines alone. He already pulled me from the event floor. Why? Because I asked where the backup suction was. The practical threat became personal then. Earl understood it in the simple way old soldiers understand a map. The people who noticed risk were being moved away from it. That evening, Earl did not go straight home. He took the bus to a print shop near Gallatin Pike where the young clerk barely glanced at him. Earl unfolded the maintenance request and made 2 copies. One went into a plain envelope addressed to Denise Harper at the State Health Office. One went into his lunch pail beneath the dented metal tray. The original returned behind Ruth's photograph. When he got home, the duplex was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and the distant hiss of traffic after rain. Ruth's reading chair still sat by the window. Earl had tried moving it once and lasted 9 minutes before putting it back. On the kitchen table, beside the bills, lay the folded plastic square holding the older patch, the twin. It was darker than the one on his sleeve, with a small brown stain near the lower edge that no washing had ever removed. Earl kept it sealed because cloth remembered too much. That one had belonged to the worst night of his service, the night a 19-year-old private kept breathing because Earl refused to accept that he was gone. Earl picked it up and his thumb rested on the old stain. Ruth had once asked why he kept two. He told her one was for work, one was for truth. The next morning, Paul met him near the time clock. "There's a paper here for you to sign," Paul said. Earl read it without taking the pen. It stated that he agreed to follow all appearance and conduct policies during the event, that he would not enter restricted public areas, and that he would refrain from unauthorized clinical commentary. At the bottom, someone had added one more line. "Failure to comply may result in immediate suspension pending termination review." Earl handed it back. Paul's face fell. "Earl, I won't sign a lie. It's not a lie, it's a policy acknowledgement. It says I made unauthorized clinical commentary. I made a safety report." Paul lowered his voice. "If you refuse, they can suspend you before the event. Then they can write that down too." Paul looked older than he had the week before. "I'm trying to keep you employed." "I know. Do you? Because Ruth would want you to have a roof." The name hit harder than Paul intended. For a moment, Earl's hand paused against the locker frame. His mouth tightened, and the hallway seemed to shrink around him. Then he opened his locker. Ruth's photograph waited inside, smiling in lake sunlight. Earl took the original maintenance request from behind it. He placed the paper in the sealed plastic sleeve with the darker patch, then slid both into the inside pocket of his janitor vest. Paul watched him do it. "What are you doing? Keeping what matters together. This is going to cost you. It already has." The moral choice did not arrive like thunder. It arrived as a simple fact. Earl could protect his job by becoming exactly as invisible as Raines wanted, or he could keep standing near the truth until someone with power was forced to see it. He chose the second. On the morning of the event, the hospital gleamed. Earl had been assigned to basement waste corridors, but a catering spill near the auditorium entrance sent Paul's radio crackling before the first guests arrived. Paul hesitated, then called the only man who could clean it fast without making a bigger mess. "Maddox," he said over the radio, voice strained. "Main lobby. Cranberry spill by auditorium doors. Quick pass only. Then disappear." Earl picked up his mop bucket. Before he left the basement, Miguel caught him at the elevator. "They moved the airway cart behind the podium," Miguel said. "Still missing the backup kit." Miguel saw the shape in his vest pocket. "Is that the copy?" And something older. "Mr. Maddox, if this goes bad—" "If it goes bad," Earl said, "don't let them say no one warned them." The elevator doors opened. Upstairs, music drifted faintly through the ceiling, polished and expensive. Cameras were already rolling. Governor Whitaker was minutes away. Earl pushed the mop bucket inside. He did not know whether he was walking toward a spill, a suspension, or the end of his life as a quiet man. But he knew one thing with the clarity that had kept people alive in worse places. A room full of powerful people was about to learn the difference between being staged and being ready. The cranberry spill spread in a red fan across the lobby marble, bright enough to draw every eye and slippery enough to send someone down hard. Earl worked fast. He set 2 caution signs, soaked the edge first to stop the spread, and kept his bucket close to the wall so guests could pass. The event had already filled the auditorium entrance with donors, reporters, security, and hospital executives wearing practice smiles. He was almost finished when Dr. Raines saw him. The surgeon crossed the lobby with Marla Voss at his side and Paul Griggs hurrying behind, already worried. "This area was supposed to be cleared," Raines said. Earl wrung out the mop. "It will be. Now. A wet floor doesn't leave faster because you're embarrassed by who's cleaning it." The sentence was quiet, but a reporter near the check-in table heard it. So did two board members. So did Denise Harper, who had just entered with the governor's staff. Raines's expression stayed pleasant for the cameras, but his eyes hardened. "Take your equipment and go." Earl glanced at the last streak of liquid near the auditorium threshold. 30 seconds. You don't get to negotiate. Paul stepped in softly. "Doctor, let him finish. Someone could slip." Raines did not acknowledge him. Instead, he moved close enough to Earl that the cameras could catch authority without catching the threat. "You were instructed not to appear in public areas with that patch." Earl kept both hands on the mop handle. "I was instructed to clean a spill, and you chose to make a display." "No." Raines pointed at the sleeve. "That is a display." People were watching now, not openly at first, just the sideways attention of a crowd sensing discomfort before it becomes a scene. Marla whispered, "Victor, not here." But Raines had already crossed the line inside himself. Men like him could survive mistakes. What they could not survive was being quietly disobeyed by someone they had already decided was beneath them. He raised his voice. "Get that mop and that costume patch out of my operating corridor." The phrase moved through the lobby like cold air. Earl's fingers tightened once around the wood handle. A donor lowered his phone. Denise Harper stopped beside the registration table. Miguel, stationed near the back as respiratory support, lifted his head sharply. Raines reached toward the patch and pinched its edge. "Army medic," he read. "How noble. Did they teach you to mop faster?" A laugh started somewhere and died unfinished. Earl's voice dropped. "Don't touch that, or what?" That was when Governor Whitaker collapsed. The podium microphone popped sideways. His wife cried his name. Security surged, then hesitated. Guests pulled back in a broken circle, half frightened, half filming. Raines went down beside the governor and announced himself before anyone asked. "Clear the area. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon." Earl saw the governor's mouth work without enough air. The sound coming from him was not right. Wet, tight, fading. His skin had changed too quickly. "Check his airway," Earl said. Raines did not move his hands from the governor's wrist. "Stay back, he's obstructing." Back. Miguel pushed through with a medical bag. Raines snapped at him to bring the event cart. Miguel ran to the podium, yanked open the drawer, and froze for the smallest fraction of time. No backup suction kit. Earl saw it. So did Tessa Green, standing near the emergency doors after being pulled off the floor but unable to stay away. Her hand went to her mouth. Raines demanded a wheelchair. Earl felt the old war inside his body wake up, not as memory, but as order. Airway first, breathing second. Pride nowhere. The governor's wife gripped her husband's sleeve. "Please, he can't breathe." Earl lowered himself beside her, careful, steady. Raines seized his shoulder. "You take one more step toward my patient and I'll have you fired before this building clears." "My patient," Earl said. He did not say it with anger. He said it like he had found the crack in the wall. The governor's chest hitched, then stopped. In that instant, the humiliation became something deeper than insult. Raines was not only protecting his image. He was using Earl's station, his uniform, his age, his grief, and his job risk as a barrier between a dying man and help. Something sacred was being threatened. Not the patch, not the job, the oath. Earl had never signed on paper, but had lived by when young men bled into his hands. If you can help, you help. Earl brought his left hand to his vest pocket. Raines thought he was reaching for a phone and slapped the wrist down. The plastic sleeve slipped halfway out. Inside, the darker medic patch showed under the lobby lights, sealed beside the folded maintenance request. Denise Harper saw it first. Her eyes narrowed, then widened with recognition that had been waiting for the right detail. "Mr. Maddox," she said, moving toward them. "Is that yours?" Raines shouted, "Get her back! We need space!" But the circle had shifted, not toward Raines, toward Earl. Miguel returned with the cart. "Doctor, suction setup isn't complete." Raines's head whipped around. "Use what's there. It's not there." That sentence did more damage than a shout. Marla stared at the cart as if it had betrayed the whole event. Paul's face drained. Tessa found her voice from the edge of the crowd. "I reported that." Raines barked, "This is not the time for blame." "No," Earl said, "it's the time for air." The governor's wife looked at him, tears on her face. "Can you help him?" Raines answered before Earl could. "He is not licensed hospital clinical staff. If he touches the governor, the liability exposure is enormous." Earl heard the words liability exposure while a man lay breathless on the marble. The old wound opened then. Ruth in room 612, waiting too long because a specialist wanted one more scan before making a simple call. A young private in the dirt, eyes begging for air. Every life that had depended on someone choosing action before permission. Earl almost broke. His hand shook once. Then Miguel knelt on the other side of the governor and placed the medical bag within Earl's reach. Raines stared at him. "Alvarez, if you assist this, you are done here." Miguel swallowed. "Then write my name correctly." The camera lights blinked red. Denise Harper stepped into the circle, not as a rescuer, but as a witness with authority. "I am observing this response," she said, voice clear, "and I want every instruction audible." Raines realized too late that the room had changed from audience to record. Earl pulled the plastic sleeve fully from his vest. He did not open it yet. He set it on the marble beside the mop handle, where the darker patch and the folded report were visible to anyone close enough to matter. Then he looked at the governor's wife. "Ma'am, I was trained to keep air moving until doctors could do the rest." She nodded before Raines could stop her. Earl leaned over the governor, placed 2 fingers with practiced precision, and found what the others had missed in the chaos. Swelling, obstruction, a failing rhythm of breath that still had one narrow chance. Not louder. Commanding. "Miguel. Bag. Tessa. Call airway team again and tell them obstruction, possible severe allergic reaction. Paul, move that bucket before someone falls. Mrs. Whitaker, keep talking to him." Nobody asked why the janitor was giving orders. They obeyed because the orders made sense. Raines stood frozen for one terrible second, surrounded by witnesses, cameras, and the public ruin of his own certainty. Then the governor drew a thin, desperate breath under Earl's hands. It was not enough to save him yet, but it was enough for everyone to hear. And at the edge of the circle, Denise Harper bent down and picked up the sealed plastic sleeve, seeing at last the old medic patch and the maintenance request folded behind it. The governor's next breath came shallow, but it came. Earl did not celebrate it. He adjusted the angle of the governor's jaw, watched the rise of his chest, and kept his voice flat enough for frightened people to follow. "Slow squeeze," he told Miguel. "Not too much." Miguel worked the bag with both hands, eyes locked on Earl's timing. Tessa's voice cut through the lobby from behind them. "Airway team is coming down. Emergency response in transit. Possible anaphylaxis with airway compromise." Raines heard that word and lunged back into command. "I said cardiac event," he snapped. "Do not freelance a diagnosis." Earl did not lift his head. "His airway is closing." "You don't know that. I know what breath sounds like when it's leaving." The governor's wife gripped her husband's hand and whispered his name again and again. Denise Harper stood near the mop bucket with the sealed plastic sleeve in her hands. She had not opened it. She did not need to yet. The darker patch inside had already changed the temperature of the room. Raines saw it and tried to recover the only way he knew how. "Denise," he said, forcing his voice smooth, "that is personal property belonging to an employee who is currently interfering with a medical emergency. I'll need you to step back." Harper held the sleeve where the cameras could see it. "This employee appears to be the only person who identified the airway problem." He guessed. "No," Miguel said, still bagging. "He directed the airway response before the cart failure was discovered." Raines's eyes flashed. "Alvarez, stop talking." Miguel did not stop the bag. "No, sir." That was the first crack witnesses could understand. Then Tessa moved closer, keeping out of Earl's way. The backup suction kit is missing from the event cart. I reported it yesterday. So did respiratory. So did Mr. Maddox. Marla Voss whispered, "Tessa, please." But Tessa had spent too many years swallowing warnings. "The cart was marked ready anyway," she said. Raines pointed at the governor. "We are in an active emergency. If everyone would stop performing for cameras, I can manage my patient." Earl finally raised his eyes. The governor was moving air now, thinly, with Miguel assisting. The airway team was seconds away. Earl had created a narrow bridge from collapse to care. Now he had to decide whether to step back into invisibility or make sure the next crisis was not buried under polished language. He reached one hand toward Harper. "My sleeve, ma'am." She understood and returned the sealed plastic to him. Raines barked, "Do not turn this into a spectacle." Earl held up the older patch inside the sleeve. "This is not spectacle." Raines laughed once, sharp and ugly. "A souvenir does not make you a clinician." "No," Earl said. "It made me remember I was one when you needed me to forget." The airway team arrived then, 2 physicians and a nurse with a proper kit. Earl shifted back immediately, giving them space, reporting only what mattered. Collapse, airway compromise, suspected allergic reaction, assisted ventilation initiated, missing backup suction on staged cart. One doctor glanced at him in surprise, then got to work. Raines tried to insert himself, but the lead physician did not yield. In real emergencies, competence has a sound. Earl had spoken it, and everyone had heard. Within minutes, the governor was stabilized enough to move. A medic team rolled him toward the elevators, his wife walking beside the stretcher with one hand still on his arm. Before the doors closed, she turned to Earl. "Thank you," she said. 2 simple words, shaken in public. The lobby absorbed them. Raines adjusted his jacket, eager to rebuild the story before someone else did. The emergency response team performed appropriately. "We'll brief the press after Governor Whitaker is evaluated." Harper opened the plastic sleeve. Raines went still. Earl did not stop her. Inside was the darker Army medic patch, the one with the old stain, and the folded maintenance request. Harper unfolded the paper carefully. Her eyes moved down the 3 original lines, then the final line Earl had added. "Event, route, cart marked ready without corrected equipment." "This is dated 3 days ago," Harper said. Paul Griggs shut his eyes. Marla's tablet lowered to her side. Raines held out his hand. "That document is not official." "It is a copy of a safety report," Earl said. "From a custodian, from a witness." Raines's voice rose. "You have no formal authority to inspect clinical equipment." "I didn't inspect it as clinical equipment. I saw what was missing and I wrote it down." Harper asked, "Mr. Alvarez, did you submit a similar concern?" Miguel nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Respiratory request. Same cart. Tessa Green?" "Yes," Tessa said. "I reported the missing backup kit verbally after my request disappeared from the queue." Harper looked back to Earl. "And this patch?" The room tightened around the question. Earl held the sealed cloth in both hands now. The patch on his sleeve showed the life he had carried quietly. The old one showed the part he kept private because some stories did not become cleaner when told. "My unit medic patch," he said. "I kept 2. This one was on my jacket the night I treated 6 soldiers after an explosion outside Kandahar. One of them had a crushed airway. No hospital, no specialist, no perfect equipment, just training and time running out." He did not embellish it. That made it heavier. Raines tried to scoff, but the sound failed. Harper's face changed. "Do you have service documentation for that?" Earl nodded once. "At home, DD-214, Combat Medic Qualification, Army Commendation with Medical Citation." That was enough for the room to understand the emotional proof, but not enough to become a fairy tale. The old patch did not magically grant authority. It gave context to what everyone had just watched. The janitor had not guessed. He had recognized a dying pattern from a life no one had bothered to ask about. Harper refolded the maintenance request. "This report is the factual issue," she said clearly, so every camera and board member could hear. "This patch explains why Mr. Maddox recognized the danger before others did." Raines's panic showed then. "Denise, be careful. You're drawing conclusions in front of media without a formal review. I am stating what I personally observed. You observed an employee violating policy. I observed a delayed response, a missing item on staged emergency equipment, multiple staff confirming prior warnings, and a non-clinical employee with relevant prior training providing life-saving assistance after being physically prevented from approaching." Raines's mouth opened. No answer came quickly enough, so Earl gave the room the line that would be replayed on Nashville News that night. "You can call me a janitor," he said. "Just don't call a warning dirt." Nobody clapped. It was not that kind of moment. Instead, something more lasting happened. People stopped waiting for Raines to tell them what they had seen. Harper turned to Paul. "Mr. Griggs, secure the event card exactly as it is. Do not allow any alteration." Paul nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Marla, I need the event readiness checklist and all equipment sign-offs preserved." Marla swallowed. "I'll contact records." Raines cut in. "This is hospital property. State officials don't get to seize internal documents because of a dramatic misunderstanding." Harper's voice stayed measured. "The governor collapsed at a state-attended medical event. The equipment issue affects public safety and state contracting. I'm instructing preservation pending formal review." She faced the hospital board chair, who had been standing uselessly near the donor table. "I recommend outside counsel tonight and a temporary hold on any trauma wing contract approvals connected to this event." The board chair nodded, slow and sick-looking. That was the consequence beginning. Not instant arrest, not television fantasy. Something worse for a man like Raines. Process, records, questions he could not charm away. Raines tried one last time. "Earl," he said, suddenly using his name, "you're upset. Let's step aside and handle this professionally." Earl slid the sealed patch and the maintenance request back into the plastic sleeve. "No." He handed the sleeve to Harper. "I'm requesting a formal review of the safety report, the missing equipment, and the attempt to remove me for refusing to hide this." Raines stared at him as if the janitor had spoken a language he had not known existed. Harper accepted the sleeve. Request noted. Miguel exhaled. Tessa lowered her chin, almost smiling through tears. Paul removed his badge and opened the event cart compartment for documentation. Marla began typing with trembling fingers. Across the lobby, the cranberry stain had dried in a faint red crescent where Earl had been forced to stop cleaning. For the first time all morning, nobody told him to mop it. The stain stayed there while the cameras recorded Dr. Victor Raines standing beside a staged emergency cart that had failed in public, beside a janitor whose old Army medic patch had just become the clearest proof of all the dignity the hospital had tried to erase. By nightfall, the event was over in every way except the questions. Governor Whitaker survived. The hospital statement called it a serious allergic airway emergency and thanked the response team without naming anyone at first. But videos had already moved faster than the press office could polish them. People had seen the janitor on the marble floor. They had heard Dr. Raines call the patch a costume. They had heard Earl Maddox say, "Just don't call a warning dirt." By the next morning, St. Bartholomew brought in outside counsel. Denise Harper's office issued a preservation notice for event records, equipment checks, and staffing decisions. The trauma wing contract approvals were frozen pending review. Raines was placed on administrative leave 3 days later. Not arrested, not dragged away, nothing that simple. His surgery privileges were temporarily restricted while the medical board reviewed the incident. The hospital board opened an internal inquiry into retaliation, ignored safety reports, and whether staff had been pressured to mark equipment ready for appearance instead of function. Marla Voss resigned before the first formal interview. Paul Griggs kept his job, but not his comfort. He gave a sworn statement admitting he had been instructed to move Earl away from public areas because the patch did not fit the event image. Miguel and Tessa gave statements too. So did Earl. He wore a clean uniform to the hearing, with the faded medic patch still sewn on the sleeve. When the board's lawyer asked why he had refused to remove it, Earl did not make a speech. He placed the sealed older patch on the table and said, "Because some people only believe service matters when it comes in the right uniform." That sentence did not go viral. It did something better. It stayed in the room. 2 weeks later, Governor Whitaker returned to St. Bartholomew privately, without cameras at first. He was thinner, his voice rough, but he walked on his own. His wife came with him. They met Earl in a small conference room near the chapel, not in the lobby where everything had happened. The governor reached for Earl's hand with both of his. "I was told I owe you my life," he said. Earl shook his head. "You owe a lot of people. I was just close." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes filled. "You were close because they tried to send you away." Earl had no answer for that. The governor did not offer him a mansion, a new truck, or a television-friendly miracle. What came instead was quieter and harder to dismiss. The hospital restored Earl's record, removed the insubordination warning, reimbursed his unpaid suspension day, and placed him on paid leave while the investigation continued. They offered independent legal counsel, not through the hospital's own attorneys, and covered the remaining balance on Ruth's oxygen equipment after auditors found the billing had been mishandled. Earl accepted the corrected record. He accepted the legal counsel. The oxygen bill took him longer. "That was mine to pay," he told Harper when she called. "No," Harper said. "It was theirs to bill correctly." A month later, St. Bartholomew created a safety reporting policy that allowed any employee, clinical or non-clinical, to file urgent equipment concerns directly to an independent patient safety officer. The first training session was held in the same auditorium where the governor had collapsed. Earl did not speak at it. Miguel did. Tessa did. Paul stood in the back and listened. Dr. Raines never returned to his director position. His license was not instantly gone, but the board placed him under review, and the hospital ended his leadership contract after outside counsel confirmed retaliation and unsafe readiness practices tied to the event. For a man who had built his life on being untouchable, the consequence was not one dramatic fall. It was doors closing one at a time, each with a record attached. Earl went back to work after 6 weeks. The first morning, he arrived before sunrise, just as he always had. The basement hallway smelled like floor cleaner and warm pipes. His locker waited with Ruth's photograph taped inside, still smiling by the lake. But something had changed. Beside the time clock, someone had mounted a small brass plaque. Earl disliked plaques as a rule. Too often they were used to decorate problems instead of fixing them. This one was simple. Every warning deserves to be heard. No name. No ceremony. That helped. Miguel found him staring at it. "You hate it?" Miguel asked. "I don't hate it. That's high praise." Earl almost smiled. Later that morning, he took the sealed older patch out of his lunch pail and carried it to the chapel. He sat in the last row where Ruth used to sit during long treatment days when she wanted silence but not loneliness. For 9 months, he had kept the patch like a wound. Now he held it like evidence of having survived. "I kept standing," he said softly, not sure if he was speaking to Ruth, to the men he could not save, or to the younger version of himself who had learned too early that air could leave a body quickly. The chapel remained quiet. That was enough. He returned the older patch to the plastic sleeve and placed it behind Ruth's photograph in the locker again. Not hidden. Resting. The faded one stayed on his sleeve. That afternoon, a new custodian named Lacey asked him why he wore it. Earl glanced down at the stitching, then at the hallway where nurses, doctors, patients, and cleaners crossed paths without any camera to reward them. "It reminds me to notice," he said. Lacey nodded like she understood more than the words. Near the lobby, the marble had been polished until no trace of cranberry remained. Guests came and went. Elevators opened. Phones rang. Life resumed its ordinary noise. But Earl no longer felt invisible in it. He pushed his mop bucket past the auditorium doors, slow and steady. the old patch catching a brief strip of morning light. And this time, no one asked him to take it off. If you saw someone in a simple uniform being dismissed, would you speak up before the emergency proved they mattered? Tell me what you think in the comments and subscribe for more stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet people the world should have listened to sooner.